thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, Carol.
Valerie, in study 2, you had feminine words and masculine words.
Mm-hmm.
Can you look at the effectiveness of each of those words separately? Or do you have to look at them as a group of 5?
In terms of how they work in the IET, or you can't really disentangle an IET and decompose it in that way. But can you kind of express it?
Well, I guess my concern is, maybe because of my gender, I see the feminine words as characteristic of female.
Uh-huh.
I don't always see that for all your male words.
Yeah.
But a word like poor, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly where that comes from. Or even violent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe something.
I have a secret slide for that. Let me just, so what I did was, in order to address kind of these counterintuitive concerns with some of the masculine stereotypes that we selected, was that I had a separate subsample of men and women complete an additional pretest. So we had forced choice data where we asked participants, rather than the continuous scale, we had them indicate if they thought that these words were more typical of men versus women. And so let's see here. So I used chi-squares to analyze that. So here we have the frequency at which the 83% of the time participants in that forced choice data indicate that poor represents is very typical of men. 77% of the time it's representative of men. The word dangerous is representative of men. 72% lower class was associated with men. 93% of the time violent was associated with men. And 70% of the time mediocre was associated with women. And I also have these for the female stereotypes. So we find here these chi-squares are significantly different from chance. So chi-squares look at observed frequencies versus expected frequencies, and the observed frequencies are significantly different from what would be expected by the null hypothesis, which would be 50%. So 50% of the time, the masculine stereotypes would be associated with men versus women. But here these percentages or frequencies are significantly different from what's expected by chance. So that provides some evidence that for our face validity of these negative male stereotypes. In addition, I also ran internal reliabilities within the IET trials. So using the negative masculine and feminine stereotypes, and I got an alpha, Cronbach's alpha of 0.87. So that also provides additional evidence, kind of put your mind at ease that that these stereotypes work well together, the negative male stereotypes and the negative female stereotypes, for the purposes of the IET.
Okay.
Or it does for me, it does for you.
Well, I will add one other point.
Uh-huh.
Last semester, Liliana is a witness for me. Last semester, my psychology of men class, on day 1, I asked them for adjectives associated with men. The most common one was simple.
Oh, okay. That wasn't one of our pre-tested words, but it should have been.
Is one way to get at Harold's question to, and I'm sorry if you talked about if this is too much of a technical detail, but you can speak to it, but that wasn't me. Would be to look at the difference in response times for correct associations with female words versus correct associations with male words, and it's generally slower at correctly identifying correctly identifying the male words. That might be an indication that maybe they're not as strongly.
You mean within the IET?
Yeah.
I guess we could look at the data like that, but it's hard because it's hard to disentangle and decompose an IET in that way. It's not standard.
Yeah,
but
I'm saying because it's the forced choice, but if participants were okay with choosing male because they knew it wasn't female, but it wasn't fully male, then that would slow them down a little bit, kind of forcing that association. That would be. I'm just saying that's a way to get at this kind of thing. Comes up
we could potentially look at that and break it down like that. It's just not typical. So it's definitely something I can look into. So thank you.
This is just a general question. Has the IET ever been used before in an intervention? So has it ever been used to sort of train down implicit biases?
I don't think that the standard IET has, but they've done like spin-offs of an IET to do different types of conditioning. So different variations of an IET have been used.
Okay.
Ashley?
How do you think things like race and class might affect implicit versus explicit career attitudes?
You mean in terms of, is there a way to turn the volume off?
Yeah.
On your computer.
I don't know. I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah.
So in terms of how race and class affect career attitudes?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of like probably people who come from higher SES status don't traditionally think of the male-dominated fields as being particularly male. They sort of feel more open into like breaking into those fields versus lower class people probably just generally think, you know, a police officer is always a man and a stewardess is always a woman.
Yeah, so, and how that affects race as well, or just in the...
Do you think
SES?
that makes any difference between the implicit and the explicit attitudes that they have?
In terms of, so if we have a group of people who are high SES and low SES,
Yeah.
would you see differences in their
Yeah.
implicit versus explicit
Yeah.
career attitudes? That's a good question. I would imagine you would. Let me think about that. So, yeah, high SES people, as you would suggest, that they would feel more comfortable with maybe not even consider them traditionally masculine occupations, but just because they're higher status, they would be more comfortable pursuing them, maybe both explicitly and implicitly, but perhaps low SES people, they wouldn't feel so comfortable, they wouldn't feel comfortable explicitly, but maybe they would feel comfortable implicitly. There might be, definitely I would imagine something would be going on there.
Yeah.
Audrey?
So a question about your explicit data. So you had some interesting explicit results. In
Mhm.
particular, I think it was in study 2,
Okay.
where you were saying that you sort of interpreted as maybe men were trying to appear more chivalrous and things like that. Were you having all of your male and female subjects be run by female experimenters, or were they not being run by male experimenters? Because I was wondering if maybe like, if they're, you know, being run by a female experimenter, that might even further do what you're saying, like make them want to appear to be chivalrous or other things that are more kind toward women.
Let me go to that slide really quick. I think is it this one?
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question, we had in this study, we had a female research assistant interacting with the female participants and a male research assistant interacting with the male one, so that we could alleviate that kind of noise.
Okay.
A good point. Okay. Excellent point.
I actually had something really similar to what you were saying. An experiment, it's 3 or 4, and it was about implicit and explicit, like positive female career aspirations, and how men, in both cases, implicitly and explicitly, kind of lean on the side of positive female. I was wondering if that has anything to do with it just being psych students. Like if you were to take a group of like chemistry students or something along those lines, would you expect the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, definitely, because psychology majors are definitely predominantly female, that they are exposed to females in this atmosphere on a chronic basis. So that may very well have something to do with it here. And if we use business students or law students or chemistry students, we might find something different. So that's, I have, we ask about their college major, but I didn't look into that, so I could potentially, very good point.
And maybe even at this point too, because a lot of these kids are 101 and 102, they might not even know yet.
Yeah, maybe
and everyone has to take this, so you know, it has to take 101 and 102, so it might not even be super clear at this point, but just curious.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, this is interesting. It's not what I do, but I was excited when I saw the mass priming lexical decision task. You used a prime of 15 milliseconds, is that right? So I'm really amazed and impressed that you got an effect for such a short prime. I understand that you wanted it to be subliminal.
Yes.
But you know, when people in my field get what we would call, I would call this a sort of subset of a semantic effect. Basically, it has to do with the meaning of the prime that you're showing. To get a semantic effect at such a short prime duration is pretty remarkable. To give you a perspective, it takes, maybe you notice, it takes about 50 milliseconds for a visual percept to get from the retina to visual cortex. So that's much longer even than, so you could have done even 30 or 40 milliseconds and still gotten subliminal, non-conscious, not being aware of the prime, and still maybe even enhance your effect. Just a comment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I used the subliminal priming task and used it version of what has been published in the literature, and they use a 15 millisecond cutoff, but I have seen other ones that are, below 100 milliseconds, for instance. So 15 milliseconds to me was also very like, whoa, that's quick. You don't see it at all. But it is very surprising that we found these effects with such a very tiny, short subliminal prime.
I think too, this is just kind of a comment, I think too that it hits on the idea of what, I think once I saw the subliminal priming class, it made me think a lot towards intervention around kind of the activation of stereotype threat, and how we might, and that would be relevant obviously in a gender context as well as in a context of racial or ethnic diversity or socioeconomic diversity as well. But I think it might be interesting as a next step to think about then if this priming is also potentially priming stereotype threat itself, then how might you think about next steps with regards to women's perspectives on career paths or career attitudes?
Let me pull up something. I pulled up the wrong slide. Here we go. So I have a slide on that. Stereotype threat, for those of you who don't know, is when individuals are at risk of or fear of confirming a negative stereotype about their in-group on a performance outcome. So stereotype threat in general outlines conditions that highlight individuals' group membership and stereotypes of their in-group. So this can subsequently lead to underperformance on a stereotype relevant task. So this could be for women, it could be math-related tasks. So I just wanted to make a quick distinction that my research automatically activates the associations between self and in-group stereotypes, which has, as we talked about, leads to an increase in self-esteem and career attitudes. So this is distinct from, it's definitely related, but distinct from stereotype threat research. But if I had to speculate in terms of how the two would be related, I kind of have conceptualized self-stereotyping as maybe would best serve as a potential mediator in the relationship between gender salience and underperformance of math for women. So if I had to, I'd kind of go in that direction, but so far my research hasn't looked specifically at it, but excellent point.
All right, thank you very much, Valerie.